The Macabre history of the Vexleys. The bell tower wasn't meant to be rung. They said the bell rang once every year, though no one had pulled its rope in decades. The town of Welcroft sits in the shadow of the northern moors, its boundaries etched by fog stone, and the long memory of its people. With a population just under 2,000, Welcroft clings to the past like lichen on the old granite walls that line its roads. There are no fast food chains, no streetlights beyond the town center, and no one moves there unless they were born to it. Outsiders call it quaint, locals know better. At the edge of town, behind rusted wrought iron gates and a thinning yew hedge, stands St. Orabel's church. Built in 1831, the church's slate roof has long since curled and cracked. Its weathered stone facade is mottled with creeping moss, but it's the bell tower that commands the most attention. Narrow and tall, its windows are slitted and dark. A thin wooden cross crowns it, barely visible unless the fog breaks. According to town record, the bell hasn't been rung since 1978, and yet, every year on November 3rd, without fail, someone hears it. Just once. At 300 a.m., some claim the sound is soft, almost mournful, like it doesn't want to be heard. Others say it's loud enough to rattle windows. All agree on one thing: when the bell tolls, something follows. This story begins not with a murder or a disappearance, but with a family, the Vexleys. Arthur and Eleanor Vexley moved to Welcroft in the spring of 1966. He was a retired schoolteacher, she a former concert pianist. They purchased a rambling manor at the southern edge of town, a 3-story Georgian home with ivy-covered walls and shuttered dormers. They were quiet, courteous, and deeply private. Over time, they adopted 5 children, all from different counties, none older than 4 when they arrived. To the people of Welcroft, the Vexleys were a curiosity, not unwelcome, but not embraced either. There was something austere about Arthur, something solemn in Eleanor's eyes. But the children, James, Elsie, Tom, Clara, and Jonah, were polite and well-dressed. Always seen together, always quiet. For a while, things were uneventful. The family attended church on Sundays, the children were homeschooled. The Vexleys kept to themselves. Yet even in those early years, small unease stirred. A former grocer, now 84, remembers their visits clearly. They came in once a week, always Thursday, she recalled in a 2009 interview. The Arthur would buy the same things: oats, salt, matches, a jar of honey, sometimes 6 tins of sardines. Every week the same list, and he always paid in cash, exact change. The first incident occurred in 1971. A local boy, Samuel Rudd, went missing while walking home from school. He was 10 years old. The search lasted 4 days. Dozens of volunteers combed the moors, the forest, even the old quarry. On the 5th day, he was found just outside the churchyard of St. Orabel's. His shoes were missing. His hands were clasped in prayer. And his eyes, according to the police report, had been cleanly and surgically removed. No one was charged. That same year, the Vexley children stopped attending Sunday Mass. When asked why, Eleanor claimed the family had established a more private method of worship. In 1974, a new priest, Father Noel Bramwell, arrived in Welcroft. In his journals, recovered years later, he wrote of unease almost immediately. Nov 6, 1974, I visited the Vexley home today upon Eleanor's request. She wished to donate to the restoration fund. The house is still. Too still. The air was heavy, as though recently disturbed. I saw no children. She said they were fasting. By this point, rumors had taken hold that the children were rarely seen outdoors, that strange lights flickered behind the 3rd-floor windows at night, that the Vexleys were not aging. One evening in 1976, a group of teenagers, emboldened by alcohol and curiosity, dared each other to ring the bell at St. Orabel's. The group, all local, had climbed the rusting spiral staircase to the tower, but none reached the top. All claimed to have heard a voice, low, guttural, and distinctly non-human, whispering their names. One of them, Oliver Penn, suffered a seizure on the spot and was later diagnosed with an acute stress disorder. He never spoke again. Records show that on November 3rd of that year, a single toll was reported by 7 different households within earshot of the church. In 1978, Tom Vexley, then 14, was seen wandering the town square at dawn, barefoot, shivering, and muttering unintelligibly. He was taken to Welcroft Infirmary, where he died 2 days later of heart failure. His autopsy report, later released through legal request, noted advanced degeneration of the frontal lobe, inconsistent with age. The attending doctor described it as a brain that looked 80 years old. Arthur and Eleanor did not attend the funeral. When Clara disappeared in 1980, authorities began to take closer notice. The case file lists her last known sighting as November 2nd. She had been seen by a neighbor just outside the manor gate, holding a bundle of dried lavender and chanting softly in Latin. The following morning, the bell rang, and the town began to fracture. A special inquiry was launched. Arthur and Eleanor were interviewed. No charges were filed. They presented adoption papers, birth certificates, medical records. All appeared legitimate. But in 1982, the tide turned. Elsie Vexley, now 19, attempted to flee the manor and collapsed on the doorstep of Father Bramwell's rectory. She was malnourished, terrified, and whispered only one phrase before losing consciousness: "The bell calls the hollow ones." She died hours later from internal bleeding. The autopsy noted hundreds of fine lacerations inside her stomach and esophagus. Forensic analysis could not determine the cause. A week later, Father Bramwell disappeared. His house was found in perfect order. No sign of forced entry, no struggle. But the journal he had kept for 8 years remained. Its final entry was dated November 2nd, 1982. It read only they ring for the empty. After this point the case broke open. Authorities returned to the Vexley home with a warrant. What they found would remain classified for more than a decade. Detective Rowan Archer, now retired, was among the first to enter. "I've seen death before," he told a BBC interviewer in 1999. But that house wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. On the second floor, they found rooms meticulously preserved, one for each child, decorated to match the age they were last seen at, untouched for years. On the third floor, they discovered a sealed chamber behind a false wall. Inside, 5 identical wooden chairs arranged in a circle. Beneath each, a shallow bowl carved from black stone. Traces of dried blood. Human, but not all from the same person. One bowl was still warm. The Vexleys were nowhere to be found. There was no sign of forced exit, no vehicle gone, no footprints, no indication of struggle. It was as if they had vanished into air. On November 3rd of that year, 1982, the bell rang twice. For the first and only time in history, the investigation that followed became one of the most quietly buried in British history. The church was closed, the manor sealed, and the records transferred to a private archive under ecclesiastical authority. But the people of Welcroft remember, and every November 3rd, someone, always someone different, reports hearing the bell again. It always tolls once. The sound echoes not just through the town streets, but through the memories of those who lived through the Vexley years. A sound that brings with it cold air, dark dreams, and the sensation that something old and unfinished stirs beneath the earth, something that was never meant to be awakened. For nearly a decade after the Vexleys vanished, the town of Welcroft was suspended in a state of quiet, reluctant fear. No official declarations were made. There were no press conferences, no mass closures, no national headlines. Life continued in its eerie stillness like a scratched record that keeps turning, playing only static. But something had changed. A new family moved into Welcroft in 1990, the Malkins. Simon and Heather Malkin, both history teachers from Exeter, came seeking a slower life. They brought with them their 2 children, Lily and Edward. By all accounts, they were well liked. Friendly, inquisitive, the sort of people who seemed untouched by the quiet rot that had settled into the marrow of the town. They bought a cottage not far from St. Orabel's. They knew nothing of the bell. At least, not at first. In a recorded interview with Heather, conducted years later for a private archival project, she described the early signs. Lily began waking up at night, always at the same time, 300 m. She said she heard a sound. "I thought it was owls at first." But she'd draw these pictures. A long, narrow tower, a dark circle above it, people beneath it, their heads tilted up, and always, a black bowl. I'd never seen that symbol before. It was Edward who first spoke the phrase. He was 6. During a parent-teacher meeting, his instructor noted that he'd begun drawing complex geometric patterns in class. Circles within squares, numbers and spirals, Latin phrases written phonetically. The most frequent was, clamabant vacui in tenebris. Roughly translated, the empty cry in the dark. The Malkins began to ask questions. Carefully, quietly. At the post office, at the cafe, in the butcher's. Most turned cold or evasive. A few warned them outright. "Don't ask about the bell," the postmaster told Simon. "It's not a local story. It's a stain." But they did ask. They asked too much. In November 1992, Edward went missing. The circumstances were near identical to those of Samuel Rudd 2 decades earlier. Last seen near the edge of the churchyard. Shoes missing. Hands clasped. Eyes removed. But this time there was something new. A wax-sealed envelope had been placed on the boy's chest. Inside, a folded piece of parchment, unedged, untouched by the night air. On it, in perfect ink, was a single sentence: "The 5th seat waits no longer." At this point, the town could no longer pretend. Welcroft had swallowed its secrets long enough. A new inquiry was launched by Devon and Cornwall police, but it was clear from the outset that someone, or something, had buried the old evidence deep. Dozens of case files had vanished. The 1982 Vexley investigation, missing. Interviews with Eleanor and Arthur, redacted beyond recognition. Autopsy photos of Elsie, gone. But one record remained: the journal of Father Noel Bramwell. Somehow his writings, once stored in the rectory, had been preserved by a private collector of esoteric religious artifacts in Kent. When questioned, the collector claimed the journal had arrived in a wooden box with no return address. The only note included was a quote from Isaiah, "And the bell shall toll, and the empty shall gather." In Bramwell's journal, the final pages offered something the police had long been missing: dates, rituals, symbols, names. He called it the Hollow Mass. According to his writing, the Vexleys were part of an ancient and heretical offshoot of monastic ascetics, a cult that believed spiritual enlightenment could only be achieved by emptying oneself of worldly identity. Not just metaphorically, but physically, emotionally, even biologically. Bramwell believed the bell was the catalyst, a call to the transfigured hollow, a space between death and rebirth. Each child, he theorized, had been part of a ritualized offering, not to a god, but to something older, something tied to the land, to the stone, to the tower. And that tower, Bramwell warned, was not built to call the faithful. It was a lock meant to never be opened. On November 3, 1993, 1 year after Edward's death, the bell rang again, loud, clear. Witnesses across Welcroft reported hearing it, but this time, people also saw something. Dozens reported a figure walking through the fog near the church grounds, tall, robed, faceless, with long arms that moved unnaturally, like hinges of bone without skin. Some said it was Arthur Vexley. Others said it was no longer anyone at all. Local authorities, under pressure, finally granted access to the church's bell tower for a forensic team. What they found inside was not a bell. It was a mass of bone. Animal, human, avian, fused together and wrapped in what looked like sinew. It had no clapper, no rope, and yet it had rung. The bell was warm to the touch. Pulsing samples taken from the structure were never returned to the forensics lab. The team was reassigned. All further access to the church was revoked under authority of the archdiocese. From then on, all references to Orabels were stripped from public maps. Online articles were scrubbed. The building was declared structurally unsound and fenced off, but the tower still stands. And still, the bell tolls. In 1996, a privately funded research group, the Holt Institute for Anthropological Occultism, released an anonymous paper titled Phenomena of Auditory Apparitions, the Welcroft Signal. It claimed that the bell sound heard in Welcroft was not audible in the traditional sense. It was not carried through airwaves, but through resonant memory. The paper concluded with a chilling hypothesis that the bell was not rung for the town, but by the town. That Welcroft itself, or something beneath it, had become the instrument. After the paper leaked, the authors vanished, one by one. In the 2 decades that followed the disappearance of the Vexleys, the town of Welcroft seemed trapped in a cycle of eerie repetition. Every year on November 3rd, the bell rang once, and each time it brought a new shadow. By the early 2000s, most of the town's original families had either moved away or died. Those who remained rarely spoke of the Vexleys. Many claimed not to remember them. Others spoke as if the family had never existed. But the records, what few had survived, told otherwise. In 2004, a doctoral student named Natalie Harrow from the University of Manchester submitted a thesis proposal titled Localized Hauntology and Repetitive Phenomena, a Case Study of Welcroft. She was 27 years old and had a background in folklore, religious iconography, and ethnographic documentation. Ambitious, sharp, skeptical, her aim was simple: to investigate the intersection between folklore and psychological trauma in rural communities. She chose Welcroft because of the bell legend. She never expected what she found. Over the next 18 months, Harrow conducted dozens of interviews. She stayed in town for extended periods. She embedded herself into the fabric of Welcroft's everyday life. Her field notes, later recovered from her apartment after her death, reveal a steady decline in clarity, tone, and psychological stability. The earliest entries are clinical. Day 4. Interviewed George Langley, 74, refuses to speak the word bell. Instead refers to it as the sound before silence. Indicates long-standing family tradition of placing iron nails in windowsills every October 31st. Day 12. Observed local children tracing symbols in dirt near the church fence. Geometric patterns. Familiar. Closest match alchemical glyph for vessel inversion. But by the 5th month, her entries take a turn. Something wrong with the tower's shadow. Doesn't fall with the sun. Always eastward. Even at noon. Woke at 300 am again. Not a dream, heard it. But not outside. Inside my skull. One entry, dated November 2nd, 2005, the night before the annual toll, reads: they were never children. They wore the shape of children, but they were vessels. The next morning, Natalie Harrow was found in the nave of St. Orabel's church. She was barefoot, her hands clasped in prayer. Her eyes had been removed with surgical precision. Her laptop, field notes, and voice recorder were placed neatly beside her. One of the last recordings on the device contains a male voice, calm, quiet, deliberate. It says, "The 5th was taken, the 6th must ring." The file cuts out. Her death was ruled suicide. No formal investigation was opened, but her work did not disappear. Her advisor, Dr. Stephen Malvern, archived her thesis materials, though he never attempted to publish them. In a private letter to a colleague, Malvern wrote, "She went looking for folklore. But Welcroft doesn't have folklore. It has memory, and memory, if left too long, becomes flesh." That same year, a long sealed document was leaked from within the Ministry of Justice. It was a 1983 communication from the Home Office titled, Opera Unhallowed Vessel, Memorandum Phase 7. Though heavily redacted, the document outlined concerns that Welcroft Parish contains an ongoing theurgic anomaly with irreversible mass psychological effects, and that further exposure may trigger inherited signal phenomena. More chillingly, one section remains fully intact. Recommendation: do not interfere with the bell. It is not a warning. It is not a symbol. It is the lock. With this, a small but devoted subculture of online investigators and fringe archivists emerged. They called themselves the Ninth Tone. Their goal: to collect, transcribe, and expose every record of the Vexleys, St. Orabels, and the Bell Tower. Their site, Vessel.net, was live for just under 2 months before it was taken down by an unknown agency. Those who visited the site in time recall seeing a map of the church grounds, overlaid with heat signatures, strange geometries, and a rotating sigil that matched the bowl carvings found beneath the children's chairs. One hidden page allegedly contained a video clip, grainy, black and white, showing Eleanor Vexley in 1979, standing beneath the tower, speaking directly into the camera. Her words: "We offered them willingly." The flesh was never the point, it was the ringing. Always the ringing. Whether authentic or part of a growing mythos, the video was never found again. But the bell continued. In 2012, the church was purchased anonymously by a real estate developer and quietly demolished. It took 2 weeks. On the final day, workers unearthed a chamber beneath the tower, sealed in stone, completely dry. Inside was a single chair, black wood, empty. A former worker later confessed, anonymously to a podcaster, "It wasn't empty when we found it. There was something in the chair, something thin and tall, like it had been waiting. But it vanished when the lights hit it." On November 3rd that year, the bell rang again. No one knew how. There was no tower, no bell, nothing to ring, but it rang. And across town, 5 homes reported simultaneous power failures. In each case, the clocks restarted at 3:00 a.m. One homeowner, Henry Wessex, an electrician, filed a report with the power company claiming it wasn't an outage. It was like the house just paused. The silence was absolute. Then I heard it, not outside, inside the walls. His house burned down 6 days later. No cause determined. More disturbing still, in the ashes of the living room, fire crews recovered a bowl. Blackstone, cold to the touch. The years since have brought no answers, only a continuing rhythm. November 3rd, 2015, a young girl never seen before walks into the Welcroft town hall and says, "The 6th is rung," then collapses. No heartbeat, but no cause of death. November 3rd, 2019, satellite images show a shadow cast over the land where the church once stood, a shadow of a tower that no longer exists. And in 2022, a former MI5 analyst turned whistleblower published a redacted dossier online detailing Project Macabre, a long-running observation of rural signal events across the UK. One of the case files, Welcroft, was flagged as non-terminable. The reason? Subject appears to be self-replicating, phenomenon independent of architecture, independent of participants. The ringing is now within the land itself. He died by suicide a week later. Today, Welcroft still exists. You can drive through it. Its name appears on maps again. It has a website, a parish council, a tourism brochure with grainy photos of the moors, and a calendar of quiet local events. But the people who live there now aren't the same. The last remaining residents who remember the Vexleys, truly remember, are few. Most speak little of the past. Some claim they've always lived there and never heard a bell. Others refuse to acknowledge the church even stood, but records remain. Police reports, psychological evaluations, missing person files, journal entries, and then there are the voices, preserved in audio archives, recovered from tape, vinyl, and corrupted hard drives. Voices that never wanted to be heard. They all say the same thing in different ways. It's not over. In 2024, a construction crew digging near the ruins of the old manor unearthed a series of subterranean tunnels. Stone-lined, dry, and impossibly narrow. Forensic specialists called in to evaluate the site confirmed something unsettling. The tunnels were not man-made. The composition of the stone was not local. Carvings inside, etched with a fine instrument, were traced to pre-Christian symbology, some bearing uncanny similarities to glyphs found in Mesopotamian funerary temples. The implication was clear. The site predated the town, possibly by centuries. At the end of the longest tunnel, they found a cavity, round and domed, like a chamber. In the center, a massive bell, not made of bronze or iron, but of compacted bone, white, fused, smooth. It had no rope, no striker, no means to be rung. And yet, as they stood inside the chamber, one of the workers, a man with no known medical history, began to scream. Later in hospital, he could not describe the sound he heard, only that it wasn't meant for ears. The bell was sealed off, the excavation buried. But the man kept screaming, for days, until his body gave out. The final autopsy noted that his vocal cords had unraveled, not torn, not lacerated, unraveled, as if unwoven by a force beyond comprehension. That same year, 2 new families moved into Welcroft, young professionals, newborn children, smiling, hopeful faces. The cycle continues. In October 2025, the Ministry of Culture and Heritage quietly acquired the land surrounding the old church and manor. On paper, it's a conservation site, off-limits, monitored. But those who live near the boundary fence say they still hear things. Movement, distant voices, sometimes the sound of something large shifting beneath the earth. And then always the same toll, November 3rd, 300 a.m. The phenomenon has no name in official documents, but among fringe investigators, archivists, and the few survivors willing to speak, it has come to be known as the holocycle, a recursion of ritual, not man-made, not even ancient, but ongoing, feeding off repetition, off memory, off flesh and silence. Some now believe the Vexleys were not the cause, but the containment, that Arthur and Eleanor, whatever they truly were, had taken on the responsibility of housing the hollow, that their children, or whatever wore their faces, were constructs, vessels, designed not to live, but to anchor, and when they disappeared, the seal broke. From time to time, people try to revisit the Vexley case, documentarians, writers, fringe journalists. Most don't finish their work, some vanish, some simply stop writing, mid-sentence, as if the story refused to be told further. One unpublished manuscript found in a researcher's abandoned car contained a final handwritten page. You can't ring what never stopped ringing. You can't bury what was never alive. You can only wait until it chooses to call again. So what is the bell? Not a tool, not a warning, a signal, not sent to us, but through us, something ancient, something hungry. It will ring again, and when it does, you may not hear it with your ears, you'll feel it, in the stillness of the air, in the tremor of the walls, in the eyes of someone you love, suddenly blank and far away. Because the Vexleys were never the beginning, they were just the first to listen. And the bell tower, it wasn't meant to be rung, it was meant to contain the ringing, but now it's free.